day is kind of pulling a lot of those ideas together. As you've seen, brownfields is getting more complicated. It's you've got the cleanup issues, assessment issues, but really it's all about the reuse, and all our reuse objectives and goals are getting have many goals that cities and nonprofits and consultants have all to work together, have to work through together. So when we were thinking about this panel that we're going to have now, we had titles like Beyond Brownfields or Elephants in the Room or other such titles to express that there are other sites that aren't your garden variety brownfields. They might not be eligible for a brownfields grant, or you have to massage the project or transaction or the stakeholders in order to make it eligible for a brownfields grant. And so that's how this panel was envisioned, and we have a great moderator to navigate this complex thought. So Markus Niebanck with Amicus, take it away.
Thank you, Ignacio. Actually, the great moderator couldn't make it, so they picked me instead. But I have a great panel. Sigrida Reinis with Langan, Stephen Stoewer with the City of Anaheim, and Mike McLaughlin from SCS. And a special thanks to Dana E. Justice, who helped us arrange and pull this undertaking together. We're each going to give short introductory presentations, then we're going to have a conversation amongst ourselves, and then we want to engage the audience because, I mean, there's a ton of experience and perspective in this room, and the more that we can exchange, I think the better we're all going to be at the end of this hour. Before we start, I'm just curious, by a show of hands, I just want to get a sense of who's in the room. How many public agency, economic development, planning type people do we have here, just by a show of hands? Some. How many for-profit redevelopers? More. How many environmental consultants? Many. How about community advocates and environmental justice people? Awesome, welcome. All right, well, thank you so much. We'll get started. Each of us will be about 5 minutes long, and then we'll have about 15 of the conversation, and we're going to open up to the floor. How does this work? Like that? All right. So this is a, you know, we talked, the title of this presentation was going to be Beyond Brownfields because of what Ignacio just described. You know, we tweaked it a little bit to against the odds, just because it felt a little bit better. These are strong, challenging projects. The slides that I have here are of Emeryville, California. And when I was thinking about the Beyond Brownfields starting place, it made me think of Emeryville because, thanks to Ignacio, I had the opportunity to experience the inside of City Hall for 3 years. And Emeryville is kind of before brownfields. So when we think about beyond brownfields, you know, sites that are complicated in the traditional brownfield programmatic construct to solve for, you know, what Emeryville did in the 1980s before that construct existed is an excellent place to start when you're thinking about what you can do to maybe improve your odds to redevelop properties that don't redevelop themselves. And what I found in Emeryville that was interesting, because it's such an environmental story, but there's so much more to the story in Emeryville. Environmental was one aspect, but there were many, many other aspects that aren't talked about, at least in these forums, as often as environmental does. So it had an offshoring in the 70s. Emeryville is about a square mile. It was just a post-industrial, underutilized, almost vacant place that people drove through as they were going past Berkeley, going to Oakland or San Francisco. There wasn't much of a there, but what they did have was a small group of very inspired and creative governmental staff and a small local population. So they had a blank canvas and they had lots of flexibility. And what I discovered working inside was that some of their challenges were kind of much bigger than environmental. Environmental certainly was big, but they had super huge parcels, and sometimes they had like really teeny weeny parcels. that were positioned such that they were difficult to access, infrastructure wasn't in place, and what they did was solve for those fundamental aspects and essentially positioned Emeryville then for the environmental cleanup that would follow and the engagement of private capital to redevelop it into the mixed-use mecca that it is today. So there's some of the inspired solutions that they had, and you'll have these slides so you can look at them again. But to conclude my small introductory part, to win, you have to be able to understand what it is that you're dealing with in its totality. It's economics, it's demographics, the complications that are the cause for the abandonment that you're dealing with today. As Eric Sussman said yesterday, there's a ton of resources available right now, like we've never had before, and we can solve problems in a different way because we have access to those different resources. And just a couple of things that occurred to me in terms of making a there so that the redevelopment then can occur. You have things like fiber and utility installation. No, sorry, I thought I had one more slide. You can create public spaces in an urban wasteland that activate an area in a way that it wasn't activated before, making something then, putting something on the map that somebody who is a traditional redeveloper then will be interested in coming and taking advantage of. So my co-presenters are going to talk about some of their experiences in this space, and then we're going to have a conversation about this and about other things, and then we'll look forward to hearing what you guys have to say.
Good morning, everybody. Stephen Stoewer, City of Anaheim, Senior Project Manager. Fantastic opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you today. Figure this out. There we go. So I'm going to talk about our Lincoln landfill out at the corner of Beach Boulevard and Lincoln Avenue, hence the name Lincoln Landfill, Stinkin' Lincoln, Westgate, 39 Commons. It's had many names over the years, and no matter the name, the question remains, why buy a landfill? Well, fortunately, as we heard from the plenary yesterday morning with visionary women leaders, I was able to work under one who saw the vision of purchasing a landfill and realized that without city intervention, that land would sit there forever undeveloped. Now, granted, I've been working with the city for over 20 years, and we're still working on getting it developed. However, we have moved forward and achieved a lot of movement. I don't think anybody ever realized, let alone our visionary leaders, the challenges that ensue when you own a landfill. And although everybody thinks it's you just build on it, there's significantly more to it. We also heard yesterday about the importance of public-private partnerships. This was one of her great workings in coming up with a developer who saw the long-term vision that she had in that development and what it could be. We've gone through over 47 different site plans and iterations for what this landfill can be. Luckily, we've recently landed on one. So it's a 32-acre site, including what we call the beach frontage and the Lincoln frontage. The landfill is the red area there. The pink area is the frontage area, and the blue is a mud pit. So it's a former drilling muds from the Ariel Alinda oil wells up in North Orange County. We have never had an issue with the mud pit, and no methane. We know we've got VOCs in there, but nothing has ever been discovered on it until recently. So we now have an odd to overcome, and that's that we have an approved site plan. We have development happening at the south end of the site, and we have to figure out now what to do with our Davis mud pit portion. So public interest changes, it waxes, it wanes. We don't know what everybody wants at all the time, and you can't please everybody all the time. Over the 20 years of this project, We've had public input from wanting a park. Well, we can't build a park on a landfill. That doesn't matter. They still want a park. So one of the other presentations in the last 2 days is talking about managing expectations. How do we do that with our public residents, and how do we get them to understand that they may want a park, they may want that rocket launching pad, but we can't do that here for numerous reasons without spending tons of money. As it is, we're spending a lot of money just on maintaining the landfill gas system that didn't exist when the red site here you can see had, oh gosh, was that back in the 64 to 80s, they decided that building a mobile home park on top of a landfill was a good idea. After significant subsidence and settlement, and all of a sudden all of the utilities are above ground because none of them were working anymore or breaking. Had children out there digging holes and lighting the ground on fire with their armament back in the day. So it was, they decided quickly that that wasn't the best thing to do, so they moved the residents off of the landfill, and then it just sat fallow. The redevelopment agency, I know everybody's aware of its demise, but we were able to do some good things, and purchasing the landfill was one of them. Purchasing the frontage pieces so that we could develop and connect 32 acres of infill for a fully developed city. It's a tough thing to do. One of the challenges, or I'm sorry, the tools that we've used, the Polanco Act, I know that AB 440 is its equivalent nowadays. It's a very powerful tool. It allowed us to move forward with getting our remedial action plan approved. It, then we had the economic development downturn of 2008, and then obviously 2012 redevelopment went away. And then we had the COVID epidemic, and then supply chain. So in 2012, literally the day the state decided to get rid of redevelopment, we were scheduled to go to City Council with our final development agreement, with the disposition development agreement. That night, well, it was at 12 something in the afternoon, it happened, and our entire plan died. We were then set back another 10 years to move forward with this development. So timing is everything. We have to, it's hard to move forward with a big project like this. But like I said, the big challenge now is the Davis mud pit. Up until 2 months ago, we'd never had a positive hit of methane on the site, and now we have it in levels that are 15%, which is not a good thing. So we're trying to figure out, how do we move forward? We've got an approved plan. We have development ready to start. I have development on, yeah, that's how I feel, Syphilis. That is me with this project. Slow and steady is definitely true. But this is what we're looking at now. So the southern portion at the bottom of the screen, that's 50 or 65 units of mixed income housing. So we're going to be able to build that. That's never been a landfill, so it's okay. Now, granted, we do have all the institutional controls there and everything else. We have over 23,000 square feet of resident or retail at the pretty picture. The not as pretty picture is 140,000 square feet of retail, so we're moving forward with it. Well, what we've decided to do to keep our timeline and not get set back another 10 years and not spend I don't know, over $12 million for a new landfill gas system and then the annual cost of O&M and everything else is look at a clean closure. So we've actually worked with all of our regulators, AQMD, Water Board, LEA, CalRecycle. Fortunately, DTSC doesn't have anything to do with this one. They said, we're okay, go forth. EPA even said, you know what, that's not ours, thanks, have fun. You know it's bad when those guys say, no, go forth. So we're actually looking at a clean closure, and it's going to be able to be done in 2 phases so that we can get our main pathway into the site constructed is the first phase, and then the second phase is going to be the remainder of the north portion of the drive aisle there where the buildings are set. And that decision happened relatively quickly. Luckily, we've had 20 years of working relationship with our regulators so that we were able to sit down once this has been discovered and go, okay, these are our options. What do you think? They were instrumental in allowing this to happen in such a fast manner. Now, granted, we still have some hurdles to get through, but as it stands right now, we're looking at meeting our January construction timeline for that drive aisle. So, you know, the importance of public-private partnerships that they spoke of yesterday is critically important. For all the public agencies out there, bring your regulators on early, bring them in often, talk with everybody, make sure that your professionals who there, I know are the majority of you out there, work with them, listen to what they have to say, but challenge them as well, because nobody thought about clean closure until I said, hey, why don't we just dig this up? And everybody's, well, yeah, I guess we could do that. And so it turns out that clean closure is going to be 1/4 of the cost than it would be to build the landfill gas system, to build all of the institutional controls, double walled, double lined, all of that stuff. So pile supported foundations, you know, those drive up construction costs. So it's a fantastic opportunity that we've been able to overcome quite quickly and come up with this idea and again have the regulators buy into it. So I would encourage all of the entities out there to really work with your regulators and make sure that you develop those strong relationships with them so that you can come up with quick solutions and have a good dialogue with everybody. Thank you. Where am I going?
Okay. So that was, I think, a really great segue into one of the first projects that I wanted to talk about. Hi, my name is Sigrida Reinis. I'm with Langan Engineering and Environmental Services in the Oakland office. And one of the projects that I've been really focused on for the last several years has been the redevelopment of the Oyster Point landfill in the city of South San Francisco. For those that are not familiar with the geography of the Bay Area, the city of South San Francisco is its own entity. It's in San Mateo County. The city of San Francisco, the county of San Francisco have the same boundaries. I know, it's very confusing. And in between, you have Brisbane, the city of Brisbane. And kind of all along the bay, you have these old landfill sites. I mean, there are landfill sites that literally ring the bay. And yeah, many of them have been converted to parks, so I'm not sure what that challenge was there. But anyway, the one I wanted to talk about is Oyster Point landfill, because it's not really one of the last landfills to be redeveloped, but one of the kind of more recent ones that is being redeveloped and truly redeveloped. A lot of the other ones are just converted to parks, like Cesar Chavez Park in Berkeley used to be a landfill. You know, this is going to be a different type of a use. Yes, there will be a park, but so it kind of all starts with, obviously, you know, city planning. Somebody had a vision. That part of the story is lost to me. I don't know. But clearly, there was planning, there was a vision, and there was a plan put in place for what to do with this part of the city of South San Francisco. And most crucially, when the time came, yes, there was still we still had the redevelopment agencies, and the South San Francisco Redevelopment Agency was able to get funding. And yes, the redevelopment agencies, with the stroke of a pen, went poof. But thankfully, you know, this project had been already basically signed off on, and the funding was there. And to this day, some of the work that's being done, for example, the new infrastructure that's going into place, that is being paid by old redevelopment money that was basically put into a bank account. So even though the redevelopment agency has gone away, we then had the successor agencies, for those that are familiar with all of that terminology. The successor agency retained the responsibility, they retained the funding, and so over time, what we have is an old solid waste landfill that the city still fully owns. Like other landfills will go through, other entities are created to own the landfill. In this case, no, the city retains ownership of the landfill, they retain ownership of the refuse in the landfill, and they retain responsibility for managing that landfill. So it's an interesting, so now we move into the sort of public-private partnership kind of phase where you have a developer that took on the responsibility of hiring a consultant. Luckily, it was Langan. And we, as the consultant, we basically designed a new landfill cover. The landfill was actually in worse shape than anyone had thought. We did a geotechnical investigation. We did an environmental investigation. And yet still there were, how it is with investigations, right? You only know what you know in that little borehole that you put down. You don't know what's in between those boreholes and in between those samples. So there was, more bad news, more challenges to be overcome. But at the end of the day, it is a successful project. Phase one, the vertical construction is just about wrapped up in a nice, neat bow. And now they're moving across the road into phase two. And, yes, you have all the challenges of building on a landfill, H-pile foundations, giant concrete mats. You have utilities that need to be accounted for over the long term with flexible connections so that as the refuse continues to consolidate and settle, the utilities don't fall apart and cause all kinds of problems. Releasing water onto the landfill, not a good thing. Releasing methane, not a good thing. Like all of those things need to be sort of controlled and accounted for and designed for. But at the end of the day, what made this project successful and attracted a developer is, in my mind, with the Bay Area, we're blessed with the three most important things of real estate: location, location, and location. And the city of South San Francisco, I want to say South City because that's what we call it, but the city of South San Francisco had this vision, and you might have heard of a little company called Genentech. They're in South City. You might have heard of a little company called 23andMe. They're in South City. So South City, it reinvented itself. If you fly out of SFO and you are one of the heavies, meaning a 747 or one of the big aircraft, you take off over San Bruno Mountain, and you, maybe if it's not too foggy, you can see there's a big inscription on the side of the mountain. Sure, Hollywood has the Hollywood sign, whatever. We have the city of South San Francisco, the industrial city. And the city of South San Francisco truly transformed itself from an industrial city, much like Emeryville, to what is now, it's truly a bioengineering hub, or mecca maybe, but certainly a hub. And they had a few critical pieces of infrastructure in place, but obviously built more as part of this landfill redevelopment. More infrastructure has gone in. And then, yes, timing. We were engaged as a consultant through I don't know how many developers ago, prior to the financial crisis and the Great Recession. And then, of course, we all, or most of us, know what happened. A lot of projects went into extremely deep hibernation. But this was one of those that then came back. And somebody, new came along and kind of went, oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, this is cool. Yeah, we want to do this. So, yes, timing can be a matter of timing. And then the timing and the funding often go hand in hand. Was the redevelopment agency extant or not, during a crucial moment in time? And then, the financial crisis, and, who knows what's going to happen in the next few years. So timing is certainly a big piece of it. Kind of helpful things here. We did have a very experienced regulator. The San Mateo County is the lead enforcement agency for actually a string string of landfills in the city of Brisbane called Sierra Point. We've done a lot of work, geotechnical and environmental, for a lot of projects in the redevelopment of Sierra Point. And then I think that kind of laid the groundwork and provided confidence to everyone that a project such as Oyster Point could be tackled. And it's the same LEA, and they kind of set some very specific ground rules in the very beginning, and we follow the California landfill regulations, Title 27. Those are pretty clear on sort of what's needed in terms of a methane mitigation system and all the other things around landfills. And we have a local enforcement agency that has been, over the course of 20 years, really good to work with. They're very knowledgeable, they're consistent in their decision-making or in their approach, and have been, and continue to be really, really good to work with. So we have an experienced regulator, and so San Mateo County LEA being the important one, and then also the Regional Water Quality Control Board. There's been one individual who's pretty much been the shepherd of all of these sites on the water board side. So that's kind of my very short story on Oyster Point. I have a couple more slides, but in the interest of time, I was going to touch on some oil field redevelopment and a couple other things, but in the interest of time, I will wrap it up with that and hand it off.
Somebody's helping with the slides. That's good, I guess. Yeah, well, my name is Mike McLaughlin. I work for a company called SCS Engineers. SCS was founded in 1970, and our very first project was for Lincoln Property Company in the Palos Verdes area, near where Tiger Woods had his tragic accident. And that very first project was a methane mitigation, keeping landfill gas out from the Palos Verdes landfill out of the adjoining apartment complex. This has been an area of great personal and professional interest to me. I can't tell where these slides are.
Keep going.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I'm only an engineer. You'd think I could figure out how to use these kind of things. So I'm delighted to be here. I love the topic. My wife and my kids are tired of hearing about it. Bear with me, if you will. We've heard a little bit about public-private partnerships, and the absolutely coolest project that I'm working on right now is from back east. I make my home in Fairfax County, Virginia, and a company called Alpine X is doing a public-private partnership with the County of Fairfax on a landfill that we've been working on for a really long time. They want to turn it into an indoor snow sports complex. Now, before you sneer and scoff and all that other kind of reaction, bear with me. The fellow who's the money and the brains behind this is somebody who's created the Great Wolf Lodge package. And if you've got kids or grandkids, in my case, they love Great Wolf Lodge. This guy put 20 of these things around the country. They're all very successful, and this is the next thing he wants to do. And the first thing he did was reach out to a fellow named Bodie Miller. Anybody ever heard of Bodie Miller? They've signed up Bodie to be their ambassador. And Bodie's point is, look, the problem with America in international skiing is we don't expose our best athletes to skiing. We need to figure out some way to get snow sports available to our best athletes who tend to be in cities, urban areas, and they don't tend to have a lot of money to go spend a weekend in Aspen. There are some, but a lot of our best athletes don't have that kind of funding. We got to figure out some way to put snow sports in urban areas. Can you think of anything in an urban area that has kind of a natural slope to it? Anything at all? Well, if you've ever driven by the I-95 landfill down Interstate 95 in Fairfax County, it's pretty obvious. That's a pretty good hill. It's got most of what you need for snow sports right there, except it just needs to have a building constructed on it. And they have these things in Europe that are on landfills, and they're some of the most popular places you can be in Europe. You know, they're not all that long, 1,500 feet long, 1,700 feet long. And the ones they have in Europe that are on landfills are designed to adjust. They bring in a crew every so often and true them up a little bit to, you know, as the landfill might differentially settle a little bit. They've all got to have methane systems underneath them, of course. And this thing is a win-win-win proposition. We're going to have a snow sport complex within a 20-minute, 30-minute drive of Washington, D.C. The municipality is contributing the land, and they like this idea because a building is a lot easier to maintain in some ways than that blasted cover over top of this landfill that's been there for decades. So the municipality is willing to essentially give them the land, and they're going to contribute the improvements. The hotel, the ski slope, there's some ground sports in here as well. It's going to be a fabulous idea. And if you've got a landfill that's got a nice slope to it, and you're interested in talking with these folks, send me a note. I'd be delighted to make an introduction. I think they've got a pretty great idea. All right, well, there are all these difficult sites that we've been talking about, got all kinds of liability concerns, which we've all dealt with and grappled with over the years. And my copy of the slide just disappeared. You know about strict liability under Superfund, of course, and a lot of state laws, including out here in California, that present all kinds of issues for us. And all the technical concerns, got to do something to keep people from blowing up, breathing unhealthy air. There are contaminated soils that have to be disturbed, of course, and often contaminated groundwater associated with it. All those things are technical challenges. And a cost. Now, the land cost could be pretty nominal in the case of a landfill that a municipality owns. But there are higher development costs to account for all those features to address those problems. We've got a toolbox full of proven tools. I said that our first methane mitigation project was back in 1970. There's been a whole lot of them since then. And a lot of that stuff came out of Southern California first and then Northern California, where real estate values are ridiculous. As you know, better than I. There is money available to solve these problems and address these problems. And so we've got what kind of tools in our toolbox? Well, to address the liability concerns, we have that Brownfields Act, Superfund amendments back in 2002, 20 years ago. They give us bona fide prospective purchaser defenses, landowner defenses, that all you really have to do is take appropriate care with respect to the things you know about at those sites. And you have liability protection under Superfund, at least at the federal level. The idea was, with that amendment to Superfund, we wouldn't need to do what EPA had been doing, these prospective purchaser agreements. That's what EPA said when they first published their rules about the all appropriate inquiries and the Superfund landowner liability defenses. But they've since learned that that's not the case. Developers really want to have a little more certainty and agreement with the agency. And so Superfund prospective purchaser agreements are all the rage on Superfund sites. I've been in a couple of conference calls this week, one in Florida, one in New Hampshire, tannery site in New Hampshire, where these agreements are, they're not that long, 150, 200 pages long, and they carve out very specifically what the developer is going to do and what EPA is going to do to protect them from the liabilities associated with that activity. And there's still environmental insurance out there, although it's changed its form quite a bit, harder to get cost cap insurance. But you can get insurance for things that you don't know about. It's not easy to insure a burning building, but if the building hadn't caught on fire yet, or the Superfund site hasn't had a particular issue identified yet, you can get insurance to cover that kind of exposure. And then we've got some proven tools on the technical side. We know how to mitigate vapors coming into buildings with active systems, passive systems, and my favorite currently is a kind of a combination of active and passive. Turn on the system only when you need it with a pretty sophisticated control system to ventilate the part of the substructure that needs to be ventilated. That conserves energy. I love isolating contaminated materials underneath caps, and I like buildings to be a cap. In my experience, buildings don't tend to leak very long before somebody notices that the roof is leaking. And you get those things repaired pretty quickly. Same thing in a parking lot. If there's a sinkhole that develops, you're going to hear about it pretty quickly and get on it pretty quickly and address it. So you get more active management of these sites with a redevelopment on it. At least in my experience, that's been the case. It's a lot more active than going out once a quarter, as the regulations require, to do a superficial inspection of the cap, often with somebody who's in a hurry to get on to the next project. All kinds of technologies out there to deal with the contaminated groundwater. which, by the way, is not often the developer's responsibility at a Superfund redevelopment site or a landfill redevelopment site. If the groundwater is contaminated, in the case of this tannery up in New Hampshire, EPA has carved that out and said, you know, that others will deal with that, or they're not going to deal with it at all. But to the extent that groundwater does need to be addressed, we've got all kinds of technologies that we can put on those. And then in terms of costs, well, we have these proven technologies that can lower our uncertainty about what we're going to do about these sites. The incremental cost of putting in things like deep foundations and that sort of thing are not unacceptable if the land is coming at a pretty cheap price. I've seen plenty of sites where the $6 or $8 million it takes to put the deep foundations in is offset by a tax increment financing type of a break or so on and so forth. The project pencils out, they've looked pretty good. And it has to be observed that you got the infrastructure already there real often. I mean, you got great highways. In many cases, you've got great highways very close to these sites. They're the last big sites in an urban area, really the last available developable land. And so I think that developing these sites with hair on them is smart growth. It's maybe the poster child for smart growth. And that concludes my opening remarks. I'll pass this talking stick.
So I think what I've learned today is what's almost as challenging as redeveloping a nearly impossible redevelopment site is fitting an hour-long presentation into 5 minutes. And so I think we're gonna skip the dialogue amongst us, because you've just heard from us a lot. But I'd like to open the room, and we can start here. But then I'd like to hear from you guys about your experiences in this space. And we haven't talked a lot about oil fields. If anybody has an impossible site that is a former oil production or oil infrastructure site, we'd like to hear from you. One aspect I'd like to just kick it off is we haven't talked a lot about impossible odds in underserved communities. And in my experience, that's impossible odds layered on top of impossible odds. And one of my favorite projects is the Wishing Tree Park. And anybody here familiar with Wishing Tree? I first met the folks at Wishing Tree 20 years ago. And it's a 10-acre parcel. It's next to the Del Amo and Montrose Superfund sites. It's in a residential community. It's not a rich community. Not a ton of there in the traditional there aspect. It's now a 10-acre park. There was a field trip to it when EPA Brownfields was here in 2019. And I wish the Cynthias were here to talk about it. The one aspect that was most striking there for me, was what made that go was essentially two women in the community who believed that they had been mistreated by the Superfund sites that were next door to them, and they had been. And they took it upon themselves exclusively. They brought in the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust in the latter years, and they helped them with the funding and the final construction. But moving it through 15 years of planning and acceptance was really just two individuals. People that didn't look to the government for assistance because there was none. People that just exclusively with their own strength and wisdom moved this thing forward. And I think that impossible odds, especially in underserved communities, require something like that. Rather than looking to somebody else for assistance, you need to figure out how to do it yourself, because nobody's going to come to your aid. But if you do it that way, you're liberated, right? You're not tied by governmental funding sources necessarily. You can do what you want. So that's just an example. If anybody else has examples of impossible odds in underserved communities, and if there are oil sites, that would be even better. Would love to hear from you. You guys, I don't know if you have anything in that space. And the microphone is in the middle of the room, right? Ignacio, is that where folks that want to contribute can go? Miriam, are you going to the microphone? Awesome.
Well, don't everybody rush in at once.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see these unique sites. I'm Matt Weinfield. I buy contaminated properties, and I'm looking at a site in LA County that does have oil production fields. I have 35 years experience remediating petroleum and PCE, TCE, but I'm actually afraid of production wells. So my question is very, very simple. Do you know of any insurance program that cost caps production well abandonment? Every contractor I've talked to said, it's just T&M. Sorry, buddy. I've actually contacted Lloyd's of London and said, we're not going to insure a cost cap on well abandonment. Aside from just getting a good geological engineer, oil production engineer, have you found any financial structure to limit my risk if I buy the site and abandon these wells? No, so okay.
But you should ask Ed Morales, because he knows everything.
Anybody
about
from the
insurance.
audience? Has anybody from the audience ever
Not
insured
to call you out, Ed.
Well, abandonment. I'd love to know. I'm sitting over here. Thank you.
Contractors carry pollution liability insurance, and now insurance means different things to different people. If your contractor is negligent in the performance of the abandonment, then their liability insurance will cover that, right?
Okay.
And contractors' pollution liability insurance is intended to cover that kind of a mistake. If they make a mistake.
That's good to know. I never thought of that approach. Similarly, do you know if contractors will do them for fixed costs? I've heard a resounding no.
You may not like the fixed cost that they would do it for.
Okay.
Well, but there are people that will. I'm not our deep well guy. I could make a phone call and find out. I don't think we do it on a fixed price basis because there are just too many unknowns.
Thank you very much.
So
Ignace,
I wanted.
I'm sorry. Wait.
Oh, okay.
We have someone approaching the microphone.
Hi, Ryan Casey, SFDPH. Just wondering for the city of Anaheim, why couldn't it have been a park?
My regulators said no.
Oh, okay.
That's the only, I'm listening to Sigrida talk about the parks and everybody else talking about all these parks, and it's like, well, it's a 25-acre landfill. Why can't I have a park? But I've been told repeatedly for the last 20 years, no park. So I'm going to go back and ask my regulators that as soon as I get back to the office this afternoon.
Speaking of parks, 4 of my properties that I nominated for the community-wide assessment are parks, and one of them is on a former landfill, so thus there's a park on a former landfill. You mentioned earlier you don't want to pour water on a landfill because that's bad, and I'm concerned because the city is thinking about putting an aquatic center in that area, so any tips moving forward as we go through this assessment? I know there's a phase 1, phase 2. I just got there in December, so I haven't had time to review these items, but moving forward, any tips?
We have put aquatic centers on landfills. They're designed not to leak. Typically you like to keep the water in the pool.
Of course, but,
And if they develop a leak, your impetus is to go fix it quickly. So, I think that concern could be overcome. And I meant to say, when I was rolling through those slides, every single one of those slides was on a landfill. And a lot of them were parks. And one of the most famous parks in Virginia is Mount Trashmore. And I'll be quiet.
Thank you.
Ours is called Mount Refuse, and I wanted to call it Mount Trashmore, but I would have gotten in trouble, so it's a good thing that the contractor picked Mount Refuse.
The public.
Just a quick note on that, and I know there's another question coming, but just to circle back on the aquatic center or what have you pick one on a landfill. Just FYI, landfill caps by California Code of Regulations, the landfill cap has to be sloped to shed water. So kind of by design, if something happens, like you over-irrigate your ball fields or your aquatic center springs a leak or what have you, it should be essentially safe by design. It's one of the many redundant features, if you will. Yes, somebody's going to be super interested in maintaining, the water levels in the pool and the aquatic center, et cetera. Yeah, there are going to be a lot of eyes on a lot of things. And then kind of the last line of defense, if you will, is that clay, that impermeable or low permeability clay cap it has to be designed to shed water. So that is your ultimate line of defense. So yeah, I don't think that kind of anything is possible, really.
Hi, I actually had a question on CAP. So my office is part of the California Environmental Justice Alliance, and we do environmental justice work throughout the state. But one of the things that we've read and we've seen is that CAPs actually have a fail rate, like throughout the years it'll degrade and it will become penetrable, or if there's more information about that. So those are things that I've read and I've seen. There are a few instances in Central California where some of our partner organizations have said that, like I think a site in Arvin, California. So I'm just wondering about that concern about CAPs not being 100% foolproof.
You think in terms of its lifespan?
Yeah, because of seismic activity, we're in California particularly, other things I've seen, maybe groundwater coming up, or depending on where that cap is, it can degrade because of if there is a flood, you're in a flood area, depending on where you are.
So I know for Anaheim, one of the things that we've been concerned about, we looked at earthen caps, we've looked at asphalt caps for our landfill. The earthen cap was going to cost a significant amount of money more than an asphalt cap because of the cost of fill to bring it in, the clay cost to bring it in. We are in an incredibly sandy, silty area. So it actually made more sense for us to do an asphalt cap with a geotextile in between the layers of asphalt as the impermeability layer. And so that's what we're using for our landfill. As far as maintenance goes, again, as Mike said, you get a pothole, you're going to get out there and fix it quickly. It's very visible. You're not out there with an earthen cap where you're only out there once a quarter. So to the point where development on top of it is good, it is. It's going to allow much faster recognition of any issues that you might have. So in our case, we found it more cost effective to do an asphalt cap than the earthen cap.
So I've kind of just shifting gears, not really, but a little bit. We talked about, in my perspective at least, one of the most significant and often overlooked aspects of solving for impossible odds is changing the nature of the space itself. Either by making it there, providing infrastructure that doesn't exist, and you'll get to go first before I'll ask this question, then we can come back to that. But I'd be interested to hear from folks. I mean, it's not necessarily not for the faint of heart, but lots of land gets passed over by traditional developers just because it's a little hard. And I think the successful developers and the ones that have the most fun doing their work, they take a closer look at those sites and they solve for those problems. So I'd be interested if folks out here have some personal experiences that they've solved for, that other people have passed over, that have turned impossible odds into a long shot that pays off handsomely. So after your question and our conversation, I'll ask that.
Sure. This is Kyle Peterson with Langan. For those that are in LA, one big thing in the news environmentally was the moratorium on oil and gas production wells in the city of LA. And it was voted unanimously to end that, which is great for the city of LA to finally vote something unanimously on. But with all that money that was into production, what's the next step especially for these underdeveloped communities with it in their backyards? How do we get that from now just being sitting there to are there grants in place? What is the next step? Because it's great that production is done and they're going to stop it, but what's the next step on grants? What can I tell my prospective clients on, like, okay, now that this is done, how can we redevelop these thousands, hundreds of thousands of oil and gas well facilities throughout the LA basin.
So so, but wouldn't it, I mean, I've worked on a few recently, and I'm familiar with the changes in the South counties. It feels as if you've got to take it on a case-by-case basis, right? It depends on the size of the parcel, the location of the wells, the nature of the neighborhood, the infrastructure to the parcels themselves. I mean, if there are things lacking with respect to, again, to placemaking and preparation, you increase the odds of the developability of a parcel, again, contingent on its size. If it's a half acre, it's going to be hard. If it's 3 or 4 acres, you have a shot at doing something more creative. There is a ton. I mean, the Biden administration has flooded the economy with money, as we all experience daily, except we don't seem to get any of it. We give a lot of it. But it exists. You know, for fiber, for instance, you know, properties that don't have fiber, there's money for fiber. There's money for utilities and infrastructure. You can prepare a property, right, for its ultimate solutions, whether it's an oil field, or, you know, a small oil well parcel, or a dry cleaner. I think the chances of redevelopability are much higher if you look first at that. You know, like, what else ails this land? Even though, you know, CalGEM that oversees the abandonment of wells, you know, they don't marry very well with the regional board and the environmental considerations. But if you have the right cast of characters involved on your side of the equation, you can solve for that. The agencies won't do it for you, but you can do it for yourself. So I think there's going to be a lot of these, and I think the biggest challenge, in my estimation, is going to be the size of the parcels. Right. That's the hardest thing to solve for, and it's not environmental that you're complicated with at that point.
Thank you.
I'd just like to follow up on that question. So you're going to have these sites that you want to, you know, they're sunsetting, they're brownfields, but what will the community, can the community go to get assessment funds, planning funds? Because some of these sites, they don't fall within, okay, that's an EPA brownfields grant, or maybe it's not, or maybe that's an ECRG grant, or maybe it's not, because there are eligibility issues. And I think that's what the roadmap that many communities need, and we don't know if their answer. I mean, maybe if the DTSC folks or the EPA folks can answer that now. I mean, there's an old field, and, you know, the neighborhood wants to assess it for a park or a recreation center, or maybe housing or something else. Where do they start? Because we know cities don't have the capacity, and you know, we just have to figure out which tools we can start asking about. Because if there are no tools, we have to go knock at the legislature's office, could basically say, you know, we're kind of stuck. And we had that session yesterday, right? So anyway.
Well, and I mean, and to that, I mean, the community-wide assessment grants and the grants for you know, understanding a property or a community you know, better than it currently is, you know, may or may not be available for certain parcels. And this isn't necessarily a plug for CCLR, but it is, because there aren't many other places where you can, or people or organizations that you can call as a community member and say, you know, I have this. What can I do about it? And oftentimes it's just connecting. It's not just, but it's connecting the community with the consultant or the planner, who can walk them through maybe half of what they would need to be walked through to get to a place where things seem a little bit more clear. You know, grants are good. But I think strategic planning is as important, and the knowing who to call is often the hardest part. And the fact that you've got an organization like CCLR out there that is connected, you know, throughout the United States to professionals that can provide assistance to communities, often for free, I mean, is a tremendous resource that you can't overstate the importance of that.
Yeah, one of the slides that I had prepared and kind of ran out of time was actually a project that we did in the city of Brentwood. And for those that are not familiar, Brentwood, similar to Pittsburgh, spelled differently than the Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. Brentwood and Pittsburgh have been, well, Pittsburgh is kind of more known as an industrial city. Certainly there are oil refineries out there. And then Brentwood sits a little bit beyond that, like way eastern Contra Costa County. And Brentwood, when I was in high school, that was where we would go to pick cherries, very agricultural, and definitely not a wealthy suburb of the Bay Area, kind of the antithesis of that. And yet still over time, growth came to these areas. And one of the projects that we did in the city of Brentwood was a rather large development. The project was called the Streets of Brentwood, and they basically created a there. They created not just a shopping center, not a strip mall, but a very attractive shopping area with lots of amenities, with nice landscaping, like someplace that you would actually see yourself going to hang out as an adult, not just as a bored teenager. They created a very nice development. And oh, by the way, abandoned gas wells all over the place. So when we were engaged as the consultant to the developers, one of the things that we were tasked with was figuring out what to do with these abandoned wells. And all I can say is, we came up with the design solution, everybody signed off on it, and the building, it was all built. So to get back to the question, one of the places to go, my suggestion would be places like the city of Brentwood, and just ask them, how did you do this? How did you turn, an oil field that's so old that people forgot about that even? How did they turn an old oil field or gas field, into a vibrant community? I would ask them. I don't know what the magic was. I'm sure planning was a piece of it. How they got funding, I don't know. But all I can say is that is a success story, and you might, if somebody was interested, go talk to the city of Brentwood.
How are we doing on time? I've got 5 minutes. There's a little sign. Mary? Mary has great stories. Would you tell us a story, Mary? Mary Hashem and I, we've known each other for, 15 years? And she is very good at what she does, and I am honored to have her as a friend and somebody I've learned a lot from. Tell us a story.
Thank you, Markus. Ditto. Do we have another hour? I think my career is full of impossible odds. We seem to either be attracted to, or projects are attracted to us that are large and complicated and hairy and have multiple layers of complexity, the environmental being just one and often just the tip of the iceberg. I could tell you the story about the Asarco Globeville smelter that I worked on for 14 years and was under contract to 3, if not 4 different Asarco entities, including the bankruptcy trust, to purchase it. And in addition to the environmental problems, there was an EPA cost recovery lien. There were high-tension power lines cutting diagonally through the property. There was an old farmers and gardeners ditch that we couldn't even find the title holder to abandon the easement. There was 40 feet of relief across the property. 80% of the property was in the city and county, or in the Adams County, unincorporated Adams County, and the remainder in the city and county of Denver. So we had municipal boundaries and planning coordination to do between 2 municipal entities. I could go on. The financing and capital stack for that project was incredibly complicated. There was a Kaiser steel mill in the Inland Empire that was similarly a very problematic, difficult, complicated project. And of course, there's Campus Bay, which you're familiar with, Markus, the former AstraZeneca site. I enjoyed hearing about Oyster Point and Sierra Point. I wrote the first CC&Rs for Sierra Point when Opus developed that project, and it was fun to go back and see the condition of the buildings and the sidewalks after having developed on a landfill. Yeah, there's lots of stories. I think the challenges to overcome are many, but slow and steady. I loved the picture with the rock rolling up the hill. That is so true. But you just keep after it. The connections you form with the consultants, with the regulators, with the property owner, with the city, and most importantly with the community. I think the most rewarding project that I've worked on was the Schlag Lock property adjacent to the Baylands, very, very near South San Francisco. And that was one where it was in an extremely underserved community. It was a community where the community meetings that we held, I started asking why a certain segment of the community was not present, and was told that they couldn't come down the hill from the projects to the west because of gang turf issues. So they couldn't come to our public meetings, and it was a portion of the community that was being completely locked out of the planning and information process of what was going on at this very important historic site in their community. So we went to them, and I gathered the developers and the city of San Francisco, and my only request was, I said to the one representative who was there, you promise me we'll be safe and we will come to you. And we did, and we were told we were nuts for walking into that gang's territory, but we held a meeting with the community, with the Director of Community and Economic Development for the City of San Francisco, with the head of City Build, and the developers, and we found jobs for those people on our project, and it was truly a success, and some of those people are still my friends to this day. So those are some of the stories. I could go on, but I won't bore you.
It's like as if you bore us. I've got the red wrap-up sign.
Okay.
So I'll just wrap this up. Thank you. I just thank you to everybody for being here, for participating. Thank you to my panelists. I'll just say you can do easy or you can do hard, and both are important. I mean, easy projects are important because they bring benefits to communities. I think hard projects are more important because these are properties that have been passed over. Oftentimes they're in disadvantaged communities, and personally, it's so much more rewarding to, at the end of the day, do something that 99% of the other people that looked at it couldn't do, and to do it right. It's rewarding, it's fun, it can be profitable, it's just good, and I advocate that. So with that, thanks everybody, thanks for having us. Thank you.